Alright, I got a really neat kit from Rockler. It's a rifle pin. It has a lever action that makes the pin go out, and then you cock it again and it goes back in. It was relatively easy to put together. It's pretty straightforward. You can see the parts. There's not very many parts. The only tricky part on it, for me anyway, was the stock. The stock of it, you can see right here, has got a sleeve you screw in, and then you have to glue the stock to it. You can also make your own stock. You can take that little sleeve and glue it into a piece of wood and carve it, or make your own style of stock if you want to. But I chose to use the brass stock. So I started getting my epoxy ready. And then I wanted to make sure that the sleeve was put in there. I didn't want it to start unscrewing it and then have the stock not line up properly. So I put it on there pretty good with the channel locks. Then I started taping it up so the epoxy wouldn't get all over it. And I used painter's tape because it'll come off pretty easy, plus it'll protect it. And I cut it down, used a razor knife, and cut it down to where only the sleeve was showing. And I used the painter tape to keep the lever on the action open so I wouldn't get anything down there. And a little plastic cup. I think I put in like 8 grams each of the epoxy and of the hardener. And mix it up real good with the popsicle stick. And then coated it real well. It's a little on the loose side, so I wanted to put some epoxy inside the stock and lined it up, and I went to get some alcohol to wipe some excess off of it. So what I did is I pulled it apart and then made sure the excess on the stock, there wasn't any, and then started fiddling with it to line it up, and started pulling some of the tape off of it just to make sure that there wasn't any epoxy on it. Make sure it stayed lined up. Wiped it off with denatured alcohol just to make sure. Got it lined up the way I wanted it. And then put it on the blank and put it there to kind of dry out, harden up. And you can see the glue and the plastic and the popsicle stick. Glue kind of hardens up and it changes color so you can kind of see it. And you just kind of wait for it to. You can tie this 5-minute epoxy, so I certainly had 5 minutes on it, but I usually let it go longer than that. And you can smack it around and see if you can get the popsicle stick out of it. If you can't, then you're pretty well assured that you're in good shape with it. Then I started taking it apart gently. Make sure that there wasn't any glue anywhere, and there wasn't. So it turned out really nice. Lined up very well. And we go on to the blank now and get it to where we can get it cut. I'm using spalted tamarind. It's not extremely hard wood, but it's Nice hardwood. It had really nice grain on it, so I thought it'd go good with the gun and the style of it. So here we are in the bandsaw getting it cut. Again, it was a little hardwood, so kind of took my time making sure we got a good clean cut. And we did. And then we go and measure it up, get it centered. These blanks I've found are not what you would call extremely square, so you need to go on all four corners and get the lines set up, because somewhere you may have to go in between the lines, and I think this one was one of them. Yeah, you can kind of see there's a few lines in there. So get it set up on the brad bit, get it turned, get it all the way in, cleaning it out. You can tell by the dust on it or the chips. It's fairly hard. Didn't quite go all the way through, so I had to raise it up just a little bit and got it drilled. And again, we go to gluing. Again, I'm speeding these processes up because they're fairly cut and dried. Nice thing about the tube was it was already roughed up. It kind of came like that in the kit, so you didn't have to do any sanding on it or roughing it up. And mix up the epoxy, the infamous popsicle stick. I make sure that I get glue on the end of that tube when it goes in. Otherwise, if you leave it dry up there, you'll never get any glue on it. And then wiped it off with the denatured alcohol and let it sit there and dry up. As usual, you can see the epoxy changing color, and if you leave it there a real long time, it'll get almost an orange. So it is 5 minutes, but I always leave it there for much longer than 5 minutes just to make sure. Then you can go over and kind of test it out also. So if it's 10 or 15 minutes, then you can pick up the popsicle stick in the plastic cup and see if you can pull it out or see if anything happens to it. Usually pop it a couple times. So then we go over and square it up, get it ready for the lathe, put it on the sander. I continuously look at it and make sure that I don't over sand and start getting that too short. You can also kind of judge how far you need to go with it. And I turn it continuously in order to keep it square. And again, you just keep sanding on it until it gets down to the brass. The brass itself will get a little shiny, and you know you're there. And sometimes you have to go just a little more to get it completely done. But looks good. So let's go ahead and let's get it mounted up on the lathe. And as usual, I had it on too slow of a setting, so you'll see it grab here just a minute. I'm using the carbide. Yep, there it goes. So now I turn it up a little bit. And the carbide, it's a small radius on that carbide tip. That carbide makes fairly short work of the blank. Very easy to turn. Turned out very well. As you can see I'm working from the inside out. I usually leave the blanks a little larger in the middle than the end, a little puffed up, but since this was going on the rifle stock, I wanted it fairly even all the way across. Again, it turned very well. And I'm getting it down to the bushing right there, and then getting the center down to where it should be also. And then on the other side, on the other bushing. And then getting it a little more evened out. So we're about done with it. About ready to sand. So wipe it off with just a touch of denatured alcohol, so you saw it kind of darkened it up just a little bit, and then I let it spin, make sure it dries out. Then I start with, I think it's 230 on the sandpaper. Make sure that it's even all the way across. And then I stop it and then go with the grain. I'm looking and see if there's any real lines or grooves in it. There wasn't. But go sideways or with the grain anyway when you're sanding to make sure you get any kind of the other sanding marks out of it as you're going around like that. Then I think I go up to 400, and again we repeat the same thing. Make sure it's nice and smooth, evened all the way through, and I'll stop it again, clean it off before I sand it. Then I'll sanding with 600 here, 600 grit, and again stopping it, making sure that going with the grain, and then again wiping it off. Make sure there's not any of those any dust or anything, and it's really smooth right now. The wood was really easy to work with. I was surprised. I thought it would be a lot harder than it was. It would be very chippy, but it wasn't. And I'm using the sanding sealer here, putting several coats on, pressing it in, make sure it gets in there real well. And then I'll polish it. I think I give it like 3 coats of polish. It's a friction polish, so I tend to kind of make sure you grip it and get the rag like that, push between fingers and get a little heat on it to build up the polish. And let it dry a little bit between coats. Doesn't have to dry much. Once that friction polish, you start working it in, it dries out pretty quick. And I think we're coming up to about the last coat on it, I think. Again, putting some pressure on it between my fingers to get a little heat built up on it. Turned out really well. Grain really popped on it really nice. I think it was a good accent for that brass. Yeah, nice blank. Turned out really nice. Now put it together is fairly straightforward. You have the barrel that it goes into a sleeve, and you press it in. I think I'm finally getting the hang of this. although I don't think I left the lever open that much. Then I'm lining up the wood grain to see where I'd like to see it on the rifle. And also lining up the end, because it unscrews is how you get the pin itself in and out of it. Yep, see, didn't have it open far enough. And press very easily in. And then this, I left the sleeve in so I could line it up. And I lined it up just a little past the scope to where you could tighten it just a little bit. Then the whole thing just presses together very easily. There we go. And I put the pin itself in, which is fairly straightforward. There's a little notch, you'll feel it go in, and then line it up. You see it came out pretty good. Again, I left it just a little short, so all I had to do was tighten it just a little bit. And the lever action is kind of neat for the pin to go in and out versus the leather. I sat there and played with it for a little bit. It was pretty cool. And it was pretty easy to write with. Fit well in the hand. So it turned out very well. I was pleased with it, pleased with the wood and the blank. And there'll be a couple more shots of it that took a little better. But yeah, it turned out real good. So appreciate everybody watching. Please subscribe. I've got more videos coming out, so stay tuned.